Welcome to this briefing at the Jerusalem Press Club. I'm Talia Dekel-Fleissig, director of the club. Our guest today is Dr. Einat Wilf, former member of Knesset and now head of the Oz party that will make a run for the next general elections. Prior to serving in the Knesset between 2010 to 2013 on behalf of Labor and Atzmaut, Wilf was foreign policy advisor to Shimon Peres and a strategic consultant. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Cambridge, was a fellow at both the Jewish People's Policy Institute and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. She's published numerous books on our region, including The War of Return, written in collaboration with Dr. Adi Schwartz, the contents of which were vindicated and reinforced on October 7th. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wilf.
Thank you.
I'll just lay out a little bit the topic that we'd like to put forward today. So yesterday, the UN Security Council passed a US drafted resolution set to implement the next stage of President Trump's 20-point plan. The vote passed 13-0 with Russia and China, countries who were the most likely to veto, choosing to abstain. Meanwhile, Hamas condemned the resolutions as it sides with Israel, refusing to disarm, which is essentially a prerequisite of progressing to stage 2 of President Trump's plan. Prime Minister Netanyahu welcomed the resolution, while domestically his ministers have pledged against a Palestinian state being established, and his constituents are left somewhat confused. So putting all that forward and understanding that nevertheless the resolution was accepted last night, what are your thoughts as we move forward? What do you think a pathway means as it was put towards peace?
Okay, so first of all, even though Netanyahu doesn't like that people mention that, he has repeatedly said yes to Palestinian statehood. I always find it amusing that people find him to be the intransigent one, even though you have multiple occasions. We have it in the Bar Ilan speech that he gave when President Obama, in President Trump's first term. Again, people completely gloss over it. But the peace plan that included a Palestinian state, not even a pathway, it actually included a Palestinian state, was accepted by Netanyahu then as prime minister, to which Abu Mazen, the supposedly moderate leader of the Palestinians, said, very much consistent with the Palestinian ethos, no, no, and 1,000 times no. And again, you see Netanyahu welcoming the resolution, Hamas refusing it, refusing even the most basic element of disarming. So I just want to begin by highlighting it, because I find over the years, as I emphasize a century-long pattern in which Israel repeatedly says yes, left-wing governments, right-wing governments, and the Palestinian Arabs, to their credit, are remarkably consistent in saying no, somehow that very basic fact seems to constantly be erased and to elude people. So first, I just want to emphasize that. Beyond that, I want to say something about the plan itself, and now that it's kind of part of a UN Security Council resolution. One of the reasons that the plan has been able to marshal quite a bit of support is that it enjoys something that has been very prevalent in the 90s during the period of agreements, which was called constructive ambiguity. Shimon Peres, with whom I used to work at the time, had a phrase that in lovemaking, as in peacemaking, it's good to have your eyes a bit closed. Now, I will make no commentary on lovemaking. I will say that in peacemaking, it was an absolute disaster. As a result, I developed over the year the rival concept of constructive specificity, in which I believe that actually the key issue is to ensure that we actually know what we're talking about. Just a second. Yeah. Because the resolution and the 20-point plan has a lot of really nice words about a reformed Palestinian Authority and de-radicalization, and Gaza will not be a threat. by the way, recognizing that the problem is that Gaza built itself as a threat and therefore can no longer be a threat. These are all great words and great concepts, but they are not sufficiently specific, and the Security Council resolution does not make them more specific. And here, this is what I've been for more than 2 years, before October 7th, certainly after, and this is going to be a primary aspect of the Oz, my party's platform, is that Israel has to actually say very clearly what Israel means by a reformed Palestinian Authority, or Gaza will not be a threat, or de-radicalization. And the way I present it is that it means that the ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism, this singular obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state, unfortunately, an ideology that still unites the people of Gaza, the West Bank, millions in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and their supporters around the world. That ideology is the source of the threat. That's the reason Gaza is a threat. That's the reason that the Palestinian Authority is also kind of involved and supports Palestinianism. And the three elements that are known to serve as the infrastructure, fuel, and sustenance of Palestinianism are, of course, the idea of a right of return, which is neither a right nor a return, but it is the core ideology of Palestinianism, which means there will not be a Jewish state. The idea of perpetual refugeehood, which is again synonymous with no Jewish state. And of course, UNRWA is the organization that allows Western money and legitimacy to fuel and sustain the idea that the Jews shall not have their state. So these three elements, no UNRWA, no return, no refugeehood, is what Israel needs to present as saying this is the Israeli interpretation, just so we don't engage in destructive ambiguity, because that's what it was. We're going to make it clear that a de-radicalized Gaza means that no one in Gaza is a Palestine refugee, because that will really be weird. That no one in Gaza thinks they have a right of return into Israel, because why invest in building anything in Gaza? And I said it before October 7th, so I know where it leads. Why give money and invest in building anything in Gaza until you know that the people in Gaza actually consider Gaza their home, rather than a launch pad from which to fight against the existence of a Jewish state? Again, why consider a Palestinian Authority reformed when they still have people who live in the West Bank under Palestinian Authority control who are registered as Palestine refugees? That's really weird. Why does Abu Mazen give speeches with a key on his suit? That's weird. It means that he's signaling that there will be no Jewish state. So Israel, I think, needs to be very clear, and it's good that we welcomed the 20-point plan, the UN Security Council resolution, and now we need to say that at least what is our vision for what it means to have a de-radicalized Gaza, a reformed Palestinian Authority. And by the way, this is the pathway to a Palestinian state. It's the same pathway that's existed for the last century. Given that the only obstacle to the existence of another Arab state in the lands of the Ottoman Empire was the obsessive refusal to live next to a Jewish state, all that Israel has to do is the path to a Palestinian Arab state remains the same that it's been for the last century and more. The day that the Palestinian Arabs decide that it's more important to them to live next to a Jewish state rather than on its ruins is the day that they will have their state, and that we will have peace. So
very clear. Yeah, very clear. Thanks for that. And I definitely agree with you that, first and foremost, Israel domestically needs to decide for itself what it needs for itself. However, we're now in a certain scenario 2 years after October 7th, in a certain diplomatic context, currently with a president in the US who is probably has been the most beneficial to Israel than any of his predecessors. Do you think that moving forward, we will be in a similar or even better diplomatic situation in which we're able to implement what it is that you're envisioning for our country?
So this is the difference between American interests and Israeli interests. America, of course, is America. It sits on the wealthiest continent in the world, separated from the world by two oceans. Canada is its northern neighbor. Whatever problems it has from Mexico, it's still Mexico. America can look at the world very differently, can look at threats very differently. As a small example, I remember when early in the Biden administration, a few months into the Israeli operations in Gaza, the Biden people began to tell Israel, wrap it up. And they said it in a way that I remember thinking that I think they think we're in Afghanistan. This notion of, oh, you're being mired in a conflict. I'm like, yeah, but it's not Afghanistan. This is at our doorstep. So America's perception of threats is obviously very, very different from the Israeli perception of threats. So I believe that the American interests, and that's what is being served with the UN Security Council, is to essentially get the Israeli-Palestinian issue off the headlines long enough to promote American interests in the Middle East. As we know, America and this president have a clear vision of securing AI supply lines, ensuring that Central Asia, Muslim and Arab countries are more firmly in the American Western camp. And for that, they need the whole issue of the Palestinians, the conflict with Israel, to be out of the headlines. And this achieves it from them. And for them, constructive ambiguity works. Because even if for the next 2 years, Israel and Hamas will keep arguing the bureaucracies and the details of the security force, that doesn't make it to the headlines. That's not headline making stuff. And that's what America needs. America basically needs the whole Palestinian issue for 2 years to go shh, so that they can promote the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords, we saw it with Kazakhstan. It's no longer about normalizing relations with Israel. It's basically American shorthand for bringing the Islamic and Arab world into the Western orbit in a more structured way and pulling them as much as possible away from China and ensuring kind of the American AI energy and supply lines. But for Israel, we're stuck here. We're, as long as the Jewish people want to be sovereign, this is where the line of Israel is. So for us, we cannot afford constructive ambiguity. We cannot just settle for the issue not being in the headlines. In many ways, we fell into that trap the last time with the Abraham Accords. Our leaders sold us that trap, that we kind of have a hack around the Palestinian issue, with normalization agreements. And under that, basically, the Palestinians were able to prepare the invasion and massacre of October 7th. So we cannot fall into that trap a second time. And at least us, for ourselves, it doesn't mean we get what we want, but can we at least voice it? We say, look, America can really settle for a 2-year hiatus, but we are here, and this is at our doorstep. And the sooner we begin to address the core of the conflict, which has never been about settlements or occupations or Bibi, has always been about the complete Arab refusal, and especially the Palestinian Arab rejection of the Jewish right to self-determination in any part of the land, Gaza is actually an important opportunity to begin the transformation that has eluded us for so many decades.
So there's actually quite a lot to unpack there. I think we'll start first with the Palestinian issue itself, and then I want to actually bring you back to where American and Israeli interests align regionally, not just over the Palestinian issue. We just, in the news, we follow the news, and just before we got on the call, there was a terror attack in Gush Etzion in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and an Israeli was killed, and a few others were wounded, including a 15-year-old. How does this tie into what you're talking about when we're saying, kind of like the re-education of Palestinian communities? this kind of attack begs the question whether this is something that is truly possible, and should we be investing our energies into this kind of thing when this is a daily occurrence for Israel. And it also relates to what you were saying in terms of we're here living the experience as opposed to the rest of the world seeing it from far away.
I would argue that this is the only thing worth investing in, because all our security problem, all the suffering, all the wars, all the killing are all downstream from one obsession, this what I call Palestinianism, this obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. This is why every peace negotiations has collapsed, because every time the Palestine Arabs were told, you can have a state, but the price of that you need to live next to a Jewish state, every time they walked away and they went to war. So this is the tragedy of what we're living through. So my argument is, after decades of shortcuts, right? I'm now about to publish a book in Hebrew that is going to be called Peace Not Now. All the decades in which we tried shortcuts, direct negotiations, different Palestinian leaderships, unilateral disengagements, they have brought us closer, none closer to peace, because none of them address the core issue. And the core issue is the ideology. So I would argue that everything, all the attacks, all the killing are all downstream from the ideology. So I argue that the only thing worth investing in is the ideology and transforming it.
So one reporter is asking, and I'm going to allow myself to ask a half follow-up question regarding Netanyahu's Bar-Ilan speech, which you referred to, and is saying that the PLO specifically recognized Israel in 1993, and Mahmoud Abbas has repeatedly, including most recently at the UN, also said he believes in the two states. And I'm adding that all of these declarations were in English. And the journalist is asking if you're not being selective in which statements you decide to believe.
Oh, no, it's all the statements, and it's in English. You don't even need to know Arabic for that. What I've realized over the years, and that when Palestinians say two states, in general, what Palestinians have perfected is something that a think tank has called dual use language. They say something like, end the occupation. Westerners assume they mean the West Bank and Gaza. Palestinians mean from the river to the sea. In the same way, when they say a two-state solution or two states, and they do say that, so I'm not being selective, I acknowledge that they say that, or that they recognize Israel, I acknowledge that they say that. We assume, and we am including myself when I believed it, that one of the two states is the sovereign state of the Jewish people, right? It makes sense. Like, they have to understand that one of the two states is the sovereign state of the Jewish people. Turns out that this is our assumption. I also coined a word for it, west-planing. Because if you ask them, and to their credit, they never lie about that, but what about the so-called right of return? Again, it's not a right, but they believe in it, that millions of Arabs have a right that supersedes Israeli sovereignty to settle within Israel. Millions who live in the West Bank and Gaza demand it. So it's not about living in the West Bank and Gaza. So if you ask them about this, a minute after they say that they support a two-state solution, they will say, well, the right of return is sacred, non-negotiable, belongs to every individual in perpetuity. So that means that already from the 90s, and you can track it very clearly, and there's no difference in that between English and Arabic. They're actually, again, to their credit, remarkably consistent. If you actually zero in on the true reliable litmus test of whether they're willing to live next to the sovereign Jewish state, if you ask them about that, they will never lie. They will make it very clear that this is an absolute non-negotiable demand, which means that the only two states they've ever imagined was an Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, and another Arab state to replace Israel through this mechanism of refugee return. They're not refugees, there's no return, but that's what they believe in. So from the river to the sea, this is also true about the Arab Peace Initiative. I tested it multiple times, and I'm actually telling you and asking you as journalists to go test it yourselves. Go ask Palestinians when they say a two-state solution, and again, not with any ambiguous language. Ask them clearly as good journalists. Do they understand that one of the two states is the sovereign state of the Jewish people? Do they understand that the implication is that in any two-state solution, they are not perpetual refugees, and there is no such thing as a right of return into the sovereign state of the Jewish people, into Israel? Ask them those questions with that constructively specific language, and you're welcome to come back to me and tell me if they really accept a two-state solution when one of the two is the Jewish state. And that's my argument. For the last century, the Jews have always said yes to a two-state solution if one of the two is the Jewish state, and the Arabs have always rejected a two-state solution if one of the two is a Jewish state.
Understood. Some of the journalists are bringing us back into kind of the diplomacy of the situation. One journalist is saying that essentially two of the member states that had voted for this particular resolution, which calls to see an eventual establishment of a state based on the pathway, which we've determined is ambiguous, are saying that two of the states, the UK and France themselves, declared Palestinian statehood not so long ago. Does this align with their decision yesterday to join the resolution? Is there some kind of contradiction here?
So clearly there's a difference between people saying that there's no Palestinian state because you need to get to it, and recognizing that it already exists. But it actually fits perfectly because during all these years of recognition, I've coined another term, which I call it Schrodinger's Palestine. Because what I realized in the recognition of Palestinian statehood, it basically goes like this. And this also explains to you why Palestinians embrace it. Because the recognitions go like this. Is Palestine a state for accepting responsibility that it invaded Israel, that it committed acts of genocide on October 7th? Is Palestine a state for the purpose of recognizing that no one in Palestine is a Palestine refugee, because that would be bizarre? Is Palestine a state for the purpose of recognizing that there's no right for its people to settle in another country of which they were never citizens, what they call the right of return? So is Palestine a state for all these adult purposes? Absolutely not. The cat is dead. Is Palestine a state for the purpose of harassing Israel in international bodies? As you know, the entire ICC case is based on the assumption that Palestine already exists. Is Palestine a state for those purposes? Absolutely. The cat is alive. So again, this has been my criticism within Israel, that if we had been more sophisticated diplomatically, rather than trying to oppose recognition or saying that, France or Britain should not recognize a state of Palestine, we should have said, you know what? Wonderful. You want to recognize Palestine, make sure that it's a complete package. With your recognition, make it clear that no one in Palestine is a Palestine refugee. Issue a legal opinion that there's no right to settle in another country against its sovereign will, what they call the right of return. Defund UNRWA, because again, that would be weird. And just do it as a complete package. And let's see if that kind of recognition gets embraced by the Palestinians. So any kind of recognition that does not require them for any kind of actual responsibility, they embrace. And countries have not engaged in recognition that actually demands responsibility. And in many ways, this is what I think Israel should do. Now that there's this language of a pathway, Israel should explain what has always been the obstacle for the last century, explained very clearly that the Jews, other than their desire to be sovereign in their homeland, and at least a part of it, were never the problem, and that the only obstacle has only ever been the Arab desire to actually live next to a Jewish state. I'm sure you know, in much of my work and my books, my essays, I always bring a quote by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II, where he explains the British failure to fulfill the terms of the mandate to help the Jews achieve sovereignty in the land. And he explains the reason Britain failed is because the conflict is irreconcilable. And he says it in February 47, when all of the current excuses don't exist, no settlements, no occupation, no Bibi, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, no refugees. So, and he says the conflict is irreconcilable because the Jews in the land want a sovereign Jewish state, and the Arabs in the land want the Jews, he says, to resist to the last the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. And the thing is this, if you actually test the Bevin hypothesis as an explanatory element of the conflict, the Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state, especially the Palestine Arabs, that's what he's talking about, you'll find that it has the explanatory power all the way to the present. It explains why the Arabs of Gaza took one of the most beautiful pieces of land that has every objective reason, fertile soil, beautiful beaches, ancient trade routes, to be a global center of trade and tourism. And they took all these assets, plus billions from the world, the gullibility of Israelis who believe they just wanted to take care of their own, and turned Gaza into a single weaponized, integrated landscape for the singular purpose of so-called liberating Palestine from the river to the sea. So this is an amazingly powerful explanatory hypothesis that basically says that our tragedy is that we have millions of people organized around the idea that they don't want to build something for themselves. It's more important for them to destroy what the Jews have built rather than to build for themselves. And again, if you think I'm exaggerating, go ahead and test it. Ask them.
So some of the reporters are bringing us back to regional issues where Israel still, has a say. We're pretty much out of time, and I do want to ask you a few questions ahead of the campaign itself. But when we're talking about, the U.S. plan for the region, and you specifically said we needed to, quote unquote, get the Palestinian issue out of the way so they could move on with larger things like expanding the Abraham Accords and so forth, building an alliance against a return of Iran to the scene. Aren't these issues that are equally important for Israel to also deal with? And are those issues that we can continue dealing with as we saw over the last year, while still dealing with the Palestinian issue? Which one is more pressing in your opinion?
So on the broader issues, our interests are broadly aligned with the U.S., and we're going to say yes. We're going to say yes to every Abraham Accords. I'm not concerned about that. In general, Israel always says yes. So we're going to say yes. So I'm not concerned about that part. My argument—
Yes, again, even at the expense of Israel's qualitative military edge, there's the whole issue of the F-35s. These are also—
Israel's going to try to fight and maybe figure out and have conditions, but it will say yes. So I'm actually less concerned about that. Even before October 7th, this is one of the arguments I had. At the end of the day, I don't think Iran matters, except as the most recent supporter of Palestinianism, right? Because Palestinianism has always been the ideology of no Jewish sovereignty, it always received the changing support of every anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic power in history, from the Nazis to the Pan-Arabists to the Soviets to the Iranians, and now that the Iranians are kind of getting out, then Qatar and Turkey. But so they always change. And they are also always defeated because at the end of the day, anti-Zionism is always the ideology of failed societies. It's not it's not a coincidence that forward-looking leaders in the Middle East are letting go of anti-Zionism as a singular obsession because they no longer need it as a scapegoat from their failures because they're no longer failing. And you can still see that anti-Zionism characterizes failed societies. So for me, Iran is merely the most recent, but I think for us, we need to ensure that Palestinianism, which again is at our doorstep and causes the greatest damage, does not get the support of these changing powers. And for that, we need to be more insistent on how they're funded, fueled, and sustained on the ground.
Great, thank you. And just one last question before we let you go. A few different questions coming in about the political situation, because obviously you're already on the line, and of course today was the formal announcement of your party. What do you think is going to be different this time round? Looking back at 2022, where a lot of it was either for Netanyahu or against Netanyahu. Do you see in general the campaigns acting differently, learning lessons, and how do you specifically see yourself navigating what needs to be done in order to get a seat at the end of the day, but also having an effective and truthful campaign?
So it's tough to say at this point, and you said effective and truthful. I've made a decision to be truthful, even if it's not effective, which is therefore, I don't know. My message is going to be that if you really, really want to make sure that Netanyahu is not prime minister, then go ahead and vote for someone who promises and will actually follow up on the promise to not sit with Netanyahu. If you really, really, really want to have Netanyahu as prime minister, then vote for Likud. And I'm going to try to appeal to all the people in Israel who are absolutely sick and tired of the fact that our politics, our communications, and our brain cells are organized around a single individual. Now, is there a market for that? I don't know, but that's going to be my message. Will our politics be organized differently? I don't know. I hope so. I'm going to try to see, but who knows? I mean, I wouldn't discount the possibility that a lot of people will say, yeah, we need to move beyond these divisions. But at the critical moment, as kind of the drums will roll, people will go back to that way of thinking. I'm going to try to stick to breaking that way of thinking.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Einat Wilf. Thank you for your time and best of luck. And thank you also to my colleague, Jonathan Beck, for facilitating this briefing. And hopefully we'll have a remaining quieter day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.